Well, hello everyone, and happy Identity Management Day. Welcome to Making Security Awareness Training Stick. I am Michelle Smith, Director of Marketing and Strategic Partnerships at BARR Advisory, and I am thrilled to be introducing today's presenters. From the e-learning platform that makes security awareness training fun, we have Nick Santora, CEO of Curricula, and from the cybersecurity auditing and consulting firm that helps innovative technology and cloud service providers simplify the path to security and compliance, we have Brad Thies, founder and president of BARR Advisory. But before I hand things over to Nick and Brad, a few housekeeping items. First, the recording of this webinar will be sent out via email after the event, so keep an eye out for that. Also, we will conclude the webinar with a Q&A. So as you think of questions throughout the discussion and the presentation, please send them to me via the chat feature. We will collect your questions and Nick and Brad will answer them during the last 15 or so minutes of the event. So again, welcome and thank you all for joining us today for what is sure to be an informative, engaging, and fun conversation. So with that, I will kick it over to Nick and Brad.
Thanks, Michelle. So obviously we're going to talk about how to make security awareness training stick, but we're going to talk a little bit about why. And I think that's the most important part that's going to lead us to it. I'll start with a survey that I did on LinkedIn, which is, what do you think the number one reason why companies adopt a security awareness program is? And 44% said compliance reasons, so almost half. 38% because they got hacked. 11% is because a vendor contract required it, and a measly 7% said it's good for security. So we're going to talk about how to flip the script on that and talk about why you should make security awareness stick above and beyond all of those three things mentioned that are not really security related. So before we start, I know Brad had some stories to share based on some data and insights that his team worked on. So Brad, you want to share some info here on this slide?
Yes, thanks, Nick. And so we'll start the day off with some data, and but data does not really do justice until you have a good story behind it. And so with Happy Happy Identity Management Day, here's a few identity issues. So 79% you see on the left of a breach happening within the past 2 years because of identity issues, and then 81% you see on the right. Really start from stolen or otherwise compromised credentials. And so these are the types of stats that could be scary. They could be opportunistic as well. And I look at these, and as an information security professional, I get really excited about the opportunities, but we can't expect everybody to be as jacked up about cybersecurity as the CISO or other security professionals in the room. And so we'll talk a little bit about today, how do you really align those types of things? So I'll start off with a little bit of a story, and it kind of goes in context with really theory Y versus theory X type management. Theory Y being less of a command and control type structure, and really empowering and enabling the human side, the human element of security to really take hold, versus this kind of traditional, as Nick mentioned, a compliance thing, a compliance driven thing. How do we flip that script? And so we had a client that it was a very simple hack that started with compromised credentials. That hack happened to be a HR admin that the threat actor, the actor that didn't stop there of just compromising the HR admin credentials. They actually stole the identities of a multi-billion-dollar company across the entire HR platform. And of course, with an HR platform that handles payroll typically, and about a year after the initial compromise, without the company actually knowing about it, after stealing all the identities of the thousands of employees that work there, they were able to reroute a whole cycle of payroll of millions and millions of dollars into their own personal bank accounts that were set up in fake identities of all the employees. And so I don't tell that story to be a scare tactic. I tell that story to be an opportunistic thing, because it wasn't this person's fault that the company got hacked, that got compromised. There's a lot of other factors in there. But after we dug into it a little bit further, after we came in after post-breach, we later found out that there were some culture issues that happened. So we're going to talk about some cultural issues today. We also found out that there were folks that were aware of this problem. You could have simply added some technical safeguards such as multi-factor authentication, or maybe even going more beyond that with some zero trust authentication and passwordless type controls. But those are the technical things, and there's such a human element to this, and there's such a human risk component to this, that it was later found that there were folks in the business that felt like this was an issue, but they, one, didn't know who to turn to communicate this problem to, and two, they were a little bit apprehensive to share this information with the fear of the unknown of communicating this issue. And so with that, do we flip the script from a culture standpoint, so that people look at these awareness type programs as they're empowered to share information versus thinking of this as a compliance exercise? What do you think,
Awesome.
Nick?
No, it's what would a presentation be without numbers on a screen? And the numbers I shared are actually real. It comes from a survey that I did on LinkedIn, so you can go check that out live. I think it has a few more days left, but more importantly, it's the story behind the numbers and why we're talking about this and how we get there. And clearly that's a pretty impactful story to route millions of dollars of payroll to the wrong person. So we're going to talk a little bit more and explore on why we should care more about this problem. So on the other end of it, if we look at what we're doing in the bigger scheme of things, it's like, well, why? Well, who cares? It's got to do it for compliance, got to do it because we got hacked, got to do it for all these other reasons. Well, this is why. These are some just little tidbits of what our team went and scraped from Twitter and social media about other IT people being ridiculed for going through the silly phishing test and security awareness program. So this person at the top is furious their company did a bait and switch on them. The other person said fire is dumb, blah, 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 eat something. So not good. This is being shared publicly from employees that work at companies that go through security awareness programs that are not fun. And clearly you can see how this resonates with them, so much so that they go out of their way to write public comments about how silly their company is giving that to them. So we got to look at the deeper spectrum of what we're doing. It isn't just to check a box. If we talk about security awareness, of course, we got to do it for vendor reasons and compliance and all these other things. But if that's your only motive on why you're doing a security awareness program, we got to start over again. And if we look kind of at the root of why we're trying to do this, you got to ask yourself, if we're just there to check the box, it's not good. But ultimately, we want to change long-term behavior of our employees. So, I mean, Brad, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I can't imagine there's a CISO in the world that doesn't want to improve their cybersecurity program, right? I mean, that's kind of a rhetorical question, I would assume.
Yeah, it could be a rhetorical question. I think this also goes in the same vein as it's not an us versus them type mentality. It's kind of the good guys versus the bad guys. And so we look at it, we'll talk about culture in a minute, but changing long-term behavior is about visibility into the enterprise, and security specifically is about visibility. And the CISO or the team that the CISO has reporting to them cannot be in full control of this. And so the long-term behavior really signifies, how can we get everybody on the security team, whether you're in accounting, you're marketing, or what have you, whatever your role is in the position, one of those roles should be that you're on the security team. And that's what is about changing long-term behavior, so that we're all on the same team when we're rowing in the same direction when it comes to security issues.
Yeah, it's almost this oil and water, kind of like employees versus IT, and they're always kind of, battling each other. And if that continues to happen in the long run, then employees will continue to resent all the good security things that we're doing for them to protect them and the business and everything in between. But without that trust, without that culture that we're trying to work towards, then we're never going to get there. So good transition, like you said, to come into culture. And I think that's a term that I've probably heard overused and abused over my career in the compliance side of the fence, and now working on the fun side of the fence, trying to help people build security cultures. You know, if I look at a CISO's job of kind of all of the things they're responsible for, one of them is on building this community, building this trust, this security culture in a company. And it's no different than, you know, your company having a culture through HR, right? And HR comes in and they measure that culture, and there's habits and traits and rituals and things that we do that are kind of the norms inside of our company. I wouldn't walk into work when we were in physical office in a scuba suit, right? I would look kind of silly. You're like, why is this guy wearing a scuba suit when everyone else is wearing a regular suit? And that would be something that clearly doesn't fit the culture. Now, if we were on an island somewhere, Brad, and we were teaching scuba classes, well, our business would probably be in the business of wearing scuba suits, but we're not. So when we think of security cultures being built, we have to look at those common things, those social behaviors that we want our employees to inhibit. And really, it's all designed to protect this community against external threats. So a lot of times, I guess, when we look at security cultures in general, it's always kind of pinpointing one person or individuals on different activities. And it's not really focused on how do we get employees to work together to fight against the bigger dangers that are out there.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I mean, we've worked with several companies helping with various security awareness programs, and you could tell very quickly about the sentiment of the culture. You know, so it starts with the company culture and your values, your mission, and you know that stuff has to get right first. But we always ask, and in a lot of these kind of nudges and cues that we'll talk about in a minute, about at the end, to get everybody on the same team, you have to get the feedback as well. And so a common question is, after some of these awareness programs or awareness trainings, is having that outlet for a business user or some other user to communicate their concerns, so that you have, again, that visibility as a CISO. And the companies that have challenges with the culture usually are the ones that, after these presentations or after awareness programs, they get zero feedback. The ones that have the good culture are, and then there's buy-in and empowerment. That's where it starts. You can't just lead with security because it is a business issue. But the ones that have that great culture and great camaraderie, if you will, and kind of that social proof, which is a psychology term, are the ones that care about it and have bought into it, and then actually communicate what they're seeing on the ground. And then you get a lot of great visibility through that.
And like, if you just look deeper on this subject about, you know, like safety culture, I mean, we don't run across the highway for a reason. We kind of know the dangers of what that would bring to us. So we got to apply that concept in our companies of what does running across a highway look like, and how do we communicate that to our employees and get some buy-in from them. So that's kind of a good transition to motivation. I mean, when we look at building an organizational security culture, it's got to, you know, you hear tone at the top, right? It's got to come from the top. Well, that's important, but it also comes from the bottom too. It comes from every employee helping influence each other on why they should be doing things, and pointing out when they see things that are dangerous for the company. A lot of times we'll look at this as, you know, the institutional goal versus the individual goal. And what I mean by that is institution, right? If I'm an organization, we don't want to get hacked. Like, that's a big, big goal of ours as a company. Don't get hacked. Don't be in the news tomorrow for, you know, a cyber attack, whether we like to or not. We can't really prevent or forecast this from happening, but we're working towards that goal. On the individual side, most employees don't come into work pumped up about security awareness or security in general. It's just not a thing. It's people come in, they do other jobs. If you're not in the security or IT department, that's not your number one reason on why you show up to work. But for some reason, we think that that applies to every single employee, that they come in motivated, driving into work, or turning on their Zooms now from home saying, you know what, I cannot wait to start reporting phishing emails. I can't wait to turn on two-factor all day long. I'm going to go do some spring cleaning on my passwords. That's just not a thing that our employees do. So how do we get those goals to align with each other? is really the goal of this organizational motivation. And it's really creating incentives around how to get employees to feel comfortable talking with each other about this stuff to get community buy-in.
Yeah, take some of those statistics that you mentioned earlier about why people are doing this. And so if this is coming from whether a CISO function or a HR function or a vendor's asking you to do it or a customer's asking you to do it, you're already set up for failure, because then this is looked at as a compliance issue. And then usually when you think compliance, you think of, okay, if I'm not in compliance, what's going to happen to me? And so what's the motivation if somebody is going to raise their hand and say there's an issue? And when are we going to get to a point where those issues there's the punishment does not outweigh the benefit of communicating that problem? And so if we can think beyond just this as a compliance checkbox thing, especially when you're rolling it out, I would never say, hey, we got to do this because we have to. We got to, it's whoever's in charge of this program. And to create that empowerment, first, you got to recognize that why that Nick mentioned earlier, and make that safe place so that people feel like if there is a nonconformity, whatever that might be, encourage that, reward that, and recognize that, more importantly. And that's with anything. I mean, if you look across the organization, anything, employees have to feel recognized, and they have to feel like they're compensated fairly, and all those types of things. And if they don't feel recognized for raising their hand with security issues, then the balance isn't there when it comes to the motivation. And you look at the SolarWinds hack. One of the issues that on the aftermath of that thing is there's a lack of sharing information, not only within the companies, but also external. And so when can we look at security as a culture of sharing information outside, not only within your company, but also a culture to be comfortable and transparent to sharing with your partners so that you can address the real issue?
That's good theme, transparency, right? All of this represents your cybersecurity program. It's basically an outlet to voice in a bi-directional way or unidirectional way about things, about security things, about I'm not sure about things, about where to report things to who things. And if we don't have this culture of trust amongst each other, then people aren't going to share things. And then this is what happens when stuff gets swept under the rug for fear of getting in trouble, which leads to much bigger and consequential outcomes than if we just talked about it up front. So highly embrace the best programs we've seen are the ones that do have that culture and that employee kind of self-sharing motivation as part of an incentive to work for that organization, saying, please share it, because you'll be the hero if you catch the hackers before they do all the damage. If you sweep it under the rug, we're going to look back and try to find out who swept it under the rug. And if we're all sweeping things under the rug, well, then what are we doing this for? Just to protect ourselves? I mean, that's crazy.
And for those that are, do due diligence questionnaires with their customers, we've been on both sides, and the ones helping to fill out those things and the ones reviewing them. And when we're reviewing them, we're extremely skeptical when there's no issues. and if there's no issues, that usually means you don't really know what's going on. There's always some issue, some risk. There's always something going on in cybersecurity, and for it to be a clean bill of health every single time, I would feel more trust in the company that we're doing business with if they were transparent, and that should be the norm.
There you go. That should be the quote of the day. That should be the norm. So if we know why we're doing all of this stuff and we kind of have motivation, whether we got to do it for compliance and all the other reasons, that's cool. We know we got to do that for other reasons, but we know it's important to do this so we can get employees talking about it and sharing and trusting with each other when it comes to security. Well, how do we do it? How often do we do it? When do we do it? And that's always a great subject. And the way that I correlate this one is, if you hired me to become your health coach and you pay me a bunch of money to be your personal trainer, and I come in and I make you run on a treadmill as fast as you possibly can for 30 minutes, go into the gym, lift every single weight you possibly can until your arms get really sore, and then ask you to eat a salad at the end of the day and say, "Woo, good workout. That was awesome. I'll see you next year." you would laugh at me and say, that's insane, that I'm not going to be healthy because of this, and I'm super sore, and what a waste of time and money and effort. Well, surprise, we're doing this with our security awareness programs unintentionally, because compliance kind of forces us into this mold that we have to follow that says you must do annual security awareness training, check the box, put these requirements, document the dates, do it before they start, close the book, and then do it every single year from here on out. And we got to do it, because if you don't do it, you get charged money from someone. So what happens is that changes our mindset into just doing this stuff for compliance for the wrong reasons. And ultimately, in the long run, we're motivating our employees to just check the box and lift every weight and run on the treadmill, when we should be spreading this stuff out throughout the year, building small little progress towards a bigger achievement as a company. And like you said, nothing will be perfect. You'll never have no issues inside of your company, especially when it comes to human risk. But if you build little bits of progress and awareness throughout the life cycle of your security awareness program, well, now we're working to achieve things together, which actually helps build a security culture.
Yeah, and don't feel like this has to be a year one exercise where you get it right the first time. This is an ongoing continuous improvement piece of this. And so the delivery, I always get reminded of, if you guys have, if nobody's read the book called Workplace Wellness by Laura Putman, I'd recommend it. She's definitely not a cybersecurity expert. She's a wellness coach, and she talks about nudges and cues. We talked about the exercising piece of it, but if you go back to the 50s, everybody was a smoker. That was the norm in society. And there was all these campaigns that happened. It just wasn't a once a year type thing. And you can take the same concept of these nudges and cues. They eventually start to add up over time, where then people are bought into it. And it's not like you're mandating anything. It's just more serving up, hey, here's some interesting thing that you should look at. If you put the food in front of somebody, they're going to eat it. And eventually over time, smoking has decreased, but a lot of it was due to usually it's a family member that eventually gets buy-in, and then you start having that kind of peer effect of almost peer pressure, if you will. And so it's something that these nudges and cues really add up over time to get the outcome you'd like.
It's the longest marketing campaign you'll ever be involved with.
50 years.
Your product is security, and that's what you're selling. And you may not get the buy-in immediately, but you're right, is that a lot of times we look for quick wins and instant results and a win in general. And if you look at security awareness, it's an endless game. You can't win security awareness. Like, there's no end to this. And you might feel like you won if you completed a SOC 2 audit and you're like, I just won. We beat it, guys. But that was just an audit. That doesn't mean anything in the big scheme of things. So, I think if you come in with that mindset and you communicate that to management and everyone else involved, that security programs in general, especially security awareness, the communication of that program doesn't have an end to it. And it shouldn't. It never will. And if we get that from the beginning, then it'll be a lot easier to communicate that forever, because now it doesn't feel like we're just working for nothing. We're actually working towards gradual progress. So who loves death by PowerPoint? No one. There's not a person probably in this world, unless you're having a tough time sleeping at night. Maybe you do enjoy death by PowerPoint, so you can put yourself to sleep. But for the most part, in the corporate environment, this is a phrase that we all know and hate. When we hear training, we think of this, we hate it. We don't want to do training. It gets us upset. It feels like a waste of time. There's all of these thoughts and feelings that come into death by PowerPoint. And when I think of that, the concept is not that PowerPoint is the problem per se. It's a tool, just like any other tool, that's been misused and abused so much that it's got a bad rap for itself. Almost like using a screwdriver to hammer a nail. And it's like, yeah, it's a tool, good for other things, just you're trying to use it for the wrong purposes. And what we have turned death by PowerPoint into is this kind of world of just too much information, because it's typically not someone who's a security awareness expert that's putting this together. It's HR, it's the IT director, it's the CISO, it's the COO, it's the CEO, who knows? Someone has to go wear another hat and say, oh, got an audit coming up, got to put together some security awareness stuff. Let's put together some PowerPoints, throw it out there, check the box. Everyone clicks next as fast as they can, saves the record that they completed it, and then we're done. So how many of these have you seen in your career, Brad? And what's your opinion on the death by PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's usually a PowerPoint that doesn't even mesh with the brand of the organization either. And so nobody should blame PowerPoint for that. Marketing and your brand team are your best friend when it comes to the communication. It's more of a communication issue than, it's not like whoever's doing the presentation or whoever the CISO is or whoever in HR is checking off the box to make sure that people actually took it and doing the follow-ups. It's a communication thing. And that's why it's a cross-functional, it's a pervasive approach that the other teams like marketing make it a whole company-wide initiative and make sure everything really you wouldn't send out some messaging about the 401k plan without kind of making sure it's aligns with your guys's objectives and how you market to those things. Same goes with external communication. It shouldn't be any different with security awareness, to make sure you're running it by the marketing folks to get it polished.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, ultimately just think of the end result, the end product is that you got to influence people to do stuff. So you don't really get influence just by putting 7,000 words on a slide or a bunch of detailed information. That's just information. But if you want to actually have a conversation, a two-way street with your employees, then you got to put in the effort if you want to get the results out of it. So that kind of brings us to a good concept here of kind of where we advocate for the future of security awareness and really all online training to be done in this way, either offline too, when we get back to in person. But the concept is this Baker paradox. And the way it works is, imagine if I were to bring someone else onto the call and they come up and it's, hey, here's my friend. They wear a name tag and their name is Baker. Well, they are not doing this presentation. They just walked up on the screen. Their name's Baker. They walk off the screen. Chances are all of you that are dialed in, if I were to call every one of you in 6 months from now, probably even less than that, and ask you to recall the person that came on to the webinar that you watched in middle of April, you probably wouldn't remember. Why? Because it's meaningless. It's just a name on a name tag that meant absolutely nothing to us except for the way that the letters can be read and interpreted in the English language. So great. Alternatively, if I were to bring a friend onto the call and the friend shows up in the background of my Zoom here, and they look like this, they're a baker. They wear a big funny hat, they're baking bread, they're, you could start to think of things of what a baker is as a concept. They wear big funny hats, they wake up early, maybe you're baking something today or tonight, or maybe you haven't baked cookies in a while, let's go do that. Maybe there's a bakery that you want to go support and you haven't been to in a while, let's go there after. Tons of experiences start to come to your mind when you think of what a baker does. And the concept that we're advocating for here is that we have to move our training to this side of the fence. Instead of just writing words on a screen and lawyer language and a bunch of compliance data and a bunch of text and definitions, we need to move to the experiential-based learning, more of the story-based, more of the narrative-based learning where you're talking about a concept to someone where they're relating to experiences in their own life about that concept. And if you can do stuff in that way, if you can communicate to your employees in that way, employees actually can remember that versus remembering like a computer robot, the words on a PowerPoint that's 72 slides long.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, most of the awareness programs that I've seen have start with, here's how much we'll get fined if we don't meet this. Here's the GDPR fine. Here's our CCPA fine. Here per record. That doesn't mean anything unless you can relate it to either a story that you can recall or bring life to a particular department where that actually impacts somebody there. You don't have to cover everybody day one, but pick out a few over time, and over time that person that's watching that will start to resonate with the feeling that they get when it's more focused on kind of their area, as an example.
And I see this I still see it to this day, where IT professionals and security professionals have a tough time communicating their security investments to the board or the executive team about why they're doing things or why they want to spend money on things or time and attention. And too many times it's communicated in this left side that, well, we got to protect against this protocol and this hack and this and this and this and that. It's like, stop. Don't do that. No one cares about any of that stuff. You do because you're the expert, but you got to communicate stuff in a way that makes sense. So instead of saying we need to invest in patch management services for this reason and do this and blah, 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 talk about a story. We use, we're I don't know, a magazine manufacturing company, something like that. And we have to print magazines. And imagine if we didn't patch the server that stores all the content for the magazines and it got intercepted, ransomware, and we can't access it anymore. Well, then crap, then we can't print the magazines, and then we earn, $50 million a month on magazine subscriptions. So if we lost 1 month of magazine subscriptions, we'd be down. Then we have to fire all these people. You can see where this goes. Like, that story is so much more impactful to communicate security investments and decisions than just saying we should probably buy a patch management tool. It costs $30,000. Like, okay, well, I'm not bought into that concept. So there is a science behind this, and I'm not just saying it to say it. Clearly, Curricula advocates this because we do this. We tell stories and we make cartoons for a living to communicate these types of concepts to others, but there is a science behind what we do and what others do. So there is a study that brought in a bunch of people and talked about an event that they had at a young age. And when they were younger, the people that were being interviewed were told they were knocked over a punch bowl at a wedding, and they were asked to recall any information that they remembered about that event. And about 25% of the study participants not only remember the story happening, they remember explicit detail. That my mom had to bring me to the car, and I got yelled at, and I got grounded for weeks after that, and all these different things. Another 15% of the participants don't remember specific details, but they do remember knocking over the punch bowl and then something else happening in their lifetime. The crazy part about all of this is about 40% of these participants remember this story happening. It never happened. The whole thing was made up as part of this study to see if we can get influence of others by telling them a story, a narrative. And this whole concept is called confabulation. So it's an emergence of these memories that never took place. So, and then there's source confusion of other things where you can basically be told stories and think they're memories of your own. And there's a true science behind how this happens and why us as humans react to it so well. And we've been telling stories since the beginning of time. It's how we communicate. It's how we talk about our days. Whether we like it or not, we follow this principle of narrative format. So think about this when you're building any type of training or trying to communicate any concept to anyone. If you do it in this format of narrative format, think of the power of what you can do, or at least what you just learned today.
So Nick, are you suggesting we do some type of inception type thing where we plant dreams in people's heads? Is that the takeaway here?
Use it for goodwill, I would say. So not to not to steal sensitive passwords on a deep inception level, but think of how powerful this can be if you use it for good. So if we know that telling stories and narratives is a great way to communicate, well, we got to apply that concept across our organization. And if we're trying to look at security awareness programs and security awareness training, well, security awareness training is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of ground to cover. And I almost think of it as a big house, right? Your house is made up of many rooms and many different things inside of that, one of them being phishing tests. And for some reason, although phishing is probably one of the top topics to talk about, it is not the only topic. It is not the only way to measure security awareness in an organization. It's almost like saying that a bathroom is a house. It's like, it's not, it's a component of a house. So when we look at phishing tests and phishing simulations, there is a risk reward to running them. And I'll give you an example. The risk is if we don't run them, how do we know how susceptible we are to falling victim to a phishing attack? If we do run them, then are our employees going to hate us and distrust us for running them? The reward on the other side is that if we get a baseline, we can learn how to prevent against it. And if we don't get a baseline, well, then any day we can get hacked, and we don't have an opportunity to get hacked right now because that would bring our entire business down. So it's a controversial topic. It is, it's an important to talk about how to approach phishing simulations and not just doing them, because it's an art. It's not just do phishing tests, do more of them and spit out numbers and they get better. It's an actual behavioral approach to how to approach phishing simulations to, again, build progress inside of a company on defending against phishing attacks.
Yeah, and it certainly starts with understanding the culture and how your company is going to really perceive these types of things. You know, whether they're going to hate you or not. And you know, I love your example of the house concept. Is that yes, phishing I think typically constitutes more than 50%. You know, the latest Verizon report of a lot of hacks, and so it definitely is a big problem to address. But that, just like your house, you don't leave different rooms empty over time. It might be empty at the beginning, but over time you slowly, you know, put a piece of furniture in there. You put maybe a rug in there. Same if you look at it, if you're a gambler, you don't just put all your money on red, which could be the phishing test. You spread those chips over different numbers, and that's the challenge with security. You don't know exactly always how much is enough, but you got to make sure you're spreading the wealth out. And specifically with phishing tests, we've seen it go good and we've seen it go bad, but the ones that usually go bad is because we haven't really first thought of the culture and the outcome that we're trying to address. It again goes back to just trying to check the box and saying let's see what happens.
And it's an exciting time because phishing simulations is it's hard to come across a company that is not doing that, and if they aren't, it is a surprise, I think, and I think that'll continue to become the norm. So if you aren't doing them, you should be. Just as clarification, we're not advocating against them, but it's how you approach it. So we look at this as in the maturity model of Curricula of how we look at companies. It's the do nothingers. You're like, I'm never going to get hacked. No one's going to target me. I'm too small. They don't like my industry. We're too good. We got too many engineers on our team. Nonsense. Nonsense, complete nonsense. You will get hacked. It's a guarantee. It's just a matter of when, but it's about being prepared of what comes next. So then you get into this next stage of maturity of, I get it. We can get hacked. It's pretty dangerous. I'm going to just do something. I'm going to check the box. I'm going to get something done. And just like we talked about training, it's, oh, I just get a bunch of PowerPoints and stuff. For some reason, we go to phishing tests as the same approach. We just send out tests without thinking about what we're doing. And then you get into this more mature model where you recognize the mistakes. The training I'm giving, no one pays attention to. It's a waste of time, and they're actually getting angry at me. The phishing test that I'm sending out has established a giant gap of trust now. Now they don't trust anything that security is doing because they think we're watching them. This is real. This is what we see and experience every single day that we talk to new customers in the door, where we basically have to rebuild that trust again because tools were misused in the process, making people feel crappy about how they interact with security. So speaking of feeling bad, well, this is what employees feel like after a phishing test, right? You click on a link as a simulation and you get roped into, remedial training, and it turns into this whole thing. You got to take a day and get scolded by this person and scolded by this person and go through a bunch of exercise and more boring training and this and this and that. Ultimately, it just makes you feel really bad about yourself. And if you've ever talked to anyone that has gone through this experience, I am sure you can relate. I don't think there's anyone that came out and said, oh, that is the best phishing simulation test. I'm so happy I fell for it. And now I'm stuck in a 2-day remedial training. That's just not a characteristic that anyone wants. It's almost like getting into a car accident And the moment you get into that car accident, there's smoke going off and gasoline pouring on the floor and everyone's all upset. And then someone runs up to your car window and says, hey, yo, you don't know how to drive. I got to teach you how to become a better driver right now. It's like, hey, this is not the time or place to teach them how to become a better driver instantly. They're in an emotional state of shock. We need to recover them out of that state and talk to them like humans rather than just push them through a process. So I'm sure, Brad, in your experience of dealing with those that have fell for simulations, does that resonate? Do people generally feel upset, or what's kind of your experience been?
Well, like you said, it depends, and depending on how you roll it out, and starting with not only the mechanism, but then what's your outcome? I mean, what are you hoping for? Are you going to just run them through the process more from a compliant standpoint, or is your outcome then hopefully looking at this whole social proof concept that, okay, just it's just like looking at seatbelts. You might get a ticket for seatbelt, but you don't really put your seatbelt on to avoid a ticket. You put your seatbelt on to avoid danger, not only with yourself but others. And over time, people start to check each other. Hey, you forgot to put your seatbelt on. Same thing can go with the social proof of phishing. Hey, did you get caught? Yeah, I did. Well, what did you learn from that? And so that goes back to just creating that space. And we've had organizations that treated it like a compliance exercise, and they eventually got to their KPI, if you will, to X amount of phishing attempts, and then they ran it again, and they might have not fell for it again. But that, if you just look at it as a pure metric or a KPI, without looking at the context of then, hey, maybe you should survey that person to see how they actually felt going through that. What was the feeling when you clicked on that link? And how you can replicate that feeling so you can avoid that issue when it's really a phishing attack, so they can be aware of what's going on. Then you can take that feeling and then empower that individual to then be your extension of your team. Once that person is the extension of their team, then more the better. And so you really got to look at both sides, not only compliance but also that human aspect, like you mentioned, Nick.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough, is that talking about the story behind the click. And we live in a world where we want to solve everything through automation, and a lot of it can be. Everything can be automated. For the most part, everything will be automated, but this is the one part of cybersecurity that we actually need to have conversations, whether we like it or not. There is a story behind every click, because until we get super intelligent about every single emotion and detail in our brains coming out into the open, which seems very far off in our lifetime, we got to talk to people. And if we talk to people, we'll find out things and commonalities amongst other people that may have fell for a simulated event or been scared to talk about an event. So much so that when we see a lot of organizations that are coming in and we talk to some of their employees, they're more scared of falling for a phishing simulation test than a real fish. That's horrible. That statement alone, when we hear that, and this is not just one company saying that, this is patternistic of what we've been doing as a community, is that we're running these tests and we're treating them as these baits to penalties and not as opportunities to teach and improve and listen. And if we change the scope of what we're supposed to be doing these tests for, well, now rewind that all the way back to the beginning of this conversation of long-term behavior change. Well, now we're going to get people to open up a lot more and talk about what they're scared of, what they don't know about, why they were unsure of certain things, but we'll only get that information if we listen. So one way we do that at Curricula is we have an AI villain hacker character named Dede. So if you're not a customer, you don't know who she is, but Dede is basically the face behind our phishing simulator. So when you get hacked by a phishing test, instead of a boring text on a slide, or the hacker in the hoodie in the dark room, or just a bunch of boring PowerPoints that no one's going to pay attention to, you get caught by Dede. And now there's an experience to the face, to the simulation event, that can tie all this together and almost gamify the concept of motivating employees to talk about this stuff. Oh man, that could be Dede on the other end of that email. Or, whoa, we have a whole Slack channel dedicated to Dede because we see her and her friends trying to hit us up all the time. And now employees are sharing and almost making jokes about how they're stopping hackers in their tracks. So it's exciting. It's something that takes a lot of buy-in, takes a lot of time, but we've seen other companies with their own versions of Dede putting together kind of mascots behind these types of events, and highly encouraged, because again, you're just flipping the script on how to get people motivated.
Yeah, love love Dede. It's been a fun topic of conversation when like, oh damn, Dede got me, and then you just start talking about it, and it's a conversation. That's the nudges and cues that then happen over time.
And that's, you know, at the end of the day, is that you got to make this stuff resonate. It's got to be relatable for employees. And there is a concept called gamification that is not really used too much in this industry yet, but it will be. And just if you haven't heard this term before, a lot of people think it's playing video games. It's not. Gamification is just like your Delta Airlines or one of the frequent flyers. That's gamification. That's a process or a program designed to incentivize you to get you to do things, spend more money, take more flights, do more things, because you're now focused on getting achievements along the way. This concept of what we just talked about with Dede and reporting her and all these other things, it's the same theory. It's creating achievements and small little wins along the way to get employees to buy into our ultimate institutional goal, which is, hey, let's work together to not get hacked. So with that, that is kind of the end of our little chat about how to make security awareness stick, why we think it's important. Brad, I want to thanks for the quick convo here. It's been good to talk through some of these things. If you want to connect with Brad or myself, here's our email addresses on the screen. You could also check out our websites, curricula.com. And what's your website again?
It's BARRadvisory.com, and of course we're both on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect. We always love extending the conversation beyond just this one show here, this annual training, right?
Yep. And then we're going to open up the floor to some Q&A. So Michelle, you got a couple questions that have been coming in along the way.
Yes, thank you, Nick and Brad. Great discussion. So we're going to spend the last 10 minutes going over some of these great questions we've had coming in. So I will dive right in with the first. What's the trigger for security awareness? Who cares if it sticks?
Well, I think Nick already started to address that. I'll let you take that one, since you got some good data behind that.
It was funny because when we talked about that, like what's the event? Every company's got a different event that ultimately says we got to do something. And while I think it's good to do something, we clearly see that no one's doing this for security reasons. Everyone's doing the trigger based off compliance or something else. That doesn't mean that has to be your ultimate goal. The trigger really just gets you to do something. But just like we talked about, is that it's important to make it stick, because if it doesn't, then we're kind of just doing this for compliance. And we know that that's not the ultimate outcome we want to get to.
Awesome. Next question we have, could you describe a little bit the difference between compliance and security? How do you go beyond just checking the box for things like SOC 2?
Usually that starts, compliance a lot of times unfortunately drives the conversation, and I'll start with, that's the baseline. But unfortunately, you can't just start with compliance. You have to look beyond these frameworks, these processes, these regulations that are often put in place with good intentions, but you can't expect these things that are written down to always catch up with your specific situation, your unique technology, or if you're in an innovative industry, to always keep up with your particular environment. That's why they're trying to get more risk-based. But then what does that mean? Risk-based ends up becoming, let's just make sure we checked all this box, and think of it as a linear approach. And so when we look at security or compliance, we think of two completely different things. And we emphasize focusing on the security piece first. And because security can equal compliance, but compliance never, ever equals security, because it's a point in time and it's static. Security is that ongoing continuous improvement. And when we think of, again, security, that's very unique to your specific organization. Compliance is usually more of how do I translate and speak the same common language outside of my company, outside of my organization, whether it's through a SOC report or whether it's through mapping to ISO and things like that. And it's a lot easier to address those items from a compliance standpoint if you start with security. It's almost impossible to really address security if you start the other way around.
Great. These next two questions are kind of related to the culture topic that we went over. First, what resources or documents do you have for guiding the implementation of a security culture?
Resources, this is what we do. So we're all about building a culture from the ground up. So you can check out curricula.com. Our blog has a lot of info about this. But if you were to look and try to figure this out at your own company, go to your HR team and ask them, how do you measure culture? You might get a lot of surprise looks at you because sometimes this isn't asked of them in security. For some reason it is immediately, but go to your HR team and say, how do you measure it? I get it that we have a culture here, but I want a number. And actually what's fun about that is you could work together to kind of build a common model of almost like a qualitative discussion around it that can be turned into numbers if you really wanted to. I've seen it done a lot of different ways, but before you start going down the rabbit hole, I recommend talking with HR and creating a plan to work together to try to figure out what does culture mean at our company, and let's branch off that.
Yeah, I mean, culture is everything at a company. You can't scale a company without values and culture, and so that's why it's important to be, don't think of partner with the rest of your company when you're thinking of a security culture. And to like Nick's point, changing that from an intangible, which is more important than the most tangible things that you can measure, but how can you convert that into a tangible thing that you can measure? And a lot of times it is. There's great resources for surveys out there for just general culture stuff that you can then add to your security items. And then a lot of times what we've seen at companies is creating some type of, if you use Slack or some other communication channels, almost have some type of kudos channel for the folks that are rising to the culture that you're hoping to account for and recognize that.
So this next question kind of ties into the last and plays upon the answer you just gave. So what tips do you have for these HR teams, these people teams, to help create that culture of security? And sub-question, what's the process for setting up support groups for employees who fail the phishing tests? And what's the kind of remediation for employees there?
Good part. So the first part was, how do you get HR teams, or what
tips for the HR teams? Mm-hmm.
So it's I think collectively it's good to think of this as, like Brad mentioned, a company discussion. It's not just security. It's not just HR. It's not just IT. It's a bigger team of people that come together. And we sometimes call those ambassador teams. And the security ambassador team is essentially a representation of your company culture inside of this security communication program. So they're almost like a board of, like, they're responsible for the success or failure of the security awareness program. And if you do that, now you got more people bought in that are not essentially just the biggest executives. They're people that other people trust. And if you can get that team to kind of work together, now it comes from day one, from the new employee onboarding program to monthly town halls, quarterly, whatever people are doing remote now, it's almost themed in to the company culture. And if you do that and get there with that, when you run into those that need more help, that are clicking or not getting certain things, we have to treat them with respect, almost like we do for children that are struggling in school. You don't yell at them and call them stupid and start pointing the finger at them. You help them. So when they're repeating things for a reason, they need help, they need advice, they need to have a conversation. After you put in the effort is when you start making different decisions, because they're not children at the end of the day. If you put in the effort, have adult conversations about this, and showcase things to do and not do and get an understanding, well, then you both have a mutual agreement on what the future will look like. That's where most organizations are expecting that to just happen with magic, and it can't. It needs a real conversation.
Yeah, we've seen good success with the whole, we can call it gamification, social proof of looking at it as almost department level. Let's use phishing as an example. If you want to start, you start publicly putting those results, not at the individual level, but how did your group do during the last exercise? You got to be a little bit careful with that, because that also depends upon the culture of your company as well. But for companies that really feel confident in their cultures and recognize this, we've almost seen a gamification effect where then collectively as a department or a team, they're all really in it to think about the outcome, not only just to win the phishing simulation, but to say, hey, now they're a team and they're working together, and now they're talking and have that conversation. So you start to decentralize that compliance checking, if you will. It doesn't just come from the HR department. It's kind of decentralized into how that particular team, they probably know how to handle it best. And you can't really do that without the data being transparent across the different teams that you're looking at. But we've seen that successful. We've also seen it fail as well, because it depends upon your culture and how companies look at that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. How can I keep testing my users when curricula training is complete in our organization? Besides phishing campaigns, are there periodic surveys or quizzes months after the training is complete?
Yeah, it comes up a lot, right? I mean, you could send out 500 trainings every month. It'll never be done. So a lot of what we advocate for is that good security awareness programs are what happens when your IT team is not looking. So when you're not in our tool or any other tool, is what are people doing? What are they talking about? What are they not talking about? And it's creating kind of outside the box ways of thinking and using, especially for Curricula customers, using our stories, our characters, our themes to help support that next step of conversation. So we've seen some cool things like lunch and learns from one of the episodes that gets hacked, peanut butter and jelly sandwich shop. I've seen a lunch and learn on peanut butter and jelly sandwich provided by Frank. And it's like, that's kind of fun because now it's bringing the digital world into the physical world. But we also see, like Brad mentioned before, these hype channels where you start to put together the tools that you use commonly to tie together some of the characters and some of the stories and themes into everyday conversations. That becomes an endless opportunity of communication where, companies like ourselves, I mean, we could make 7 million episodes, all cool, but we need to get your employees to work with each other without our hand holding along the way.
Well said. You know your product better than we do. I totally agree on that.
Okay, well, that looks like it is all the time we have for today. Again, feel free to reach out to Brad and Nick via LinkedIn or the email addresses they have listed here on the screen if you have any additional questions or would like to continue the conversation. Thank you all again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Nick.